But now the question arises, how are we going to use this multi-band dynamics in our actual mastering stage, so when we're trying to provide these finishing touches. So one thing that I like to do, and one thing that makes the multiband dynamics, the multiband compression really special, is that I can compress one area of the signal or of the frequency spectrum independent of the others. So one good place to do that is just to compress the low frequencies very slightly, and that's going to basically allow your kick and your bass to even punch through a little bit more, even though we've done so many little techniques to try to make that happen. We can just add this last one, and it's gonna basically by compressing them together, it's gonna bind them a little bit closer, just the kick drum and the lower notes of the bass. So let's go ahead and look at how to do that. So let's just look at this section right here. So once again, I like to, and I'm sure there's a more technical way to do this, but I like to just solo the low band when I'm setting the frequency. So what I like to do is I like to have it be up a little bit higher. That way it actually takes in more notes of the bass line. You know, if you make it too high, then it's the whole track, so we don't really want that. So that sounds pretty good to me. So basically we're getting the bass line kind of in its entirety, as well as the kick drum. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to leave the threshold the attack and release time kind of how they are. You can see that this is kind of on the slow side in terms of the attack, but we want to make sure that it's kind of a longer attack. And the reason is we're going for transparency here. I really don't want there to be that much of a noticeable effect. We're trying to just put that, like I said, just that little bit of detail on there. So all the multiband dynamic stuff, all the mastering stuff, we're going to want to make it as transparent as humanly possible. So no big sucking, compression sound. So I actually want to just go ahead and take and press A, and so we're going to set the ratio of the compression when it hits this top threshold. So right now it's at 1:1, which means that there's actually no compression happening. So what we're going to want to do is, you'll notice if I turn it up, I can actually boost the signal. It'll actually make it louder, which is kind of what we don't want. We want there to be a little bit of compression, meaning we want to push the sound down a little bit, which seems kind of counterintuitive, right? You want to squash the sound in order to make it a little bit more apparent. So let's just make it at 1 to 1.7, something like that. And then we're going to use the input volume to kind of boost it higher again. I'm sorry, I'm going to make sure this amount is up so we can hear how it's taking effect. And so as you can see now, the yellow and the orange bands here are separating, and that's because the yellow is where it was, or where it would be without the gain reduction. So the difference between that yellow bar and the orange bar is actually the amount of gain that's reduced. So if I push this higher, the apparent volume goes up, but the actual volume doesn't. And so the actual volume is kind of what we're looking for. It's going to be what's going to make our master fader spike. So we don't want that. So right now we're not hearing as much of the effects, so maybe we're going to turn the gain up a little bit. And I like to actually just do this. Turn this lead down a little bit. Go back down here. So let's just hear how that sounds again. Maybe make the ratio a little bit more aggressive, not too aggressive. So we're starting to hear a little bit of an effect. So we can raise the... So we maybe want that attack to be a little bit lower, not super low, because it will lead to some sort of clicking. So if you're not getting the effects that you wanted, so I was kind of poking around here and I wasn't hearing that much effect. So what I wanted to do is actually raise the threshold. And the reason that happens is because the threshold was too low as it was set before, right? So basically it was starting to compress it right basically before the signal actually needed it. So you want the threshold to be near the peak of the actual signal as opposed to down in the signal too much. So let's go ahead and... So now we can hear the effect really clearly. So this is the kind of thing that you really want to play around with, and it takes a lot of subtlety because you want, like I said, you want it to be as transparent as possible. So just to recap what I did before, what I did already. So I isolated the band that I want to pump up, right? So I did this by soloing it and then looking for the band. And then what I did is I fixed the threshold so it wasn't too aggressive here, but like maybe a maximum of 1 to 2, but probably even lower than that. And then I made sure that the attack time was a little bit on the long side, but not too long. So I did about 34 milliseconds, not too long, but not too short also. And then what I did is I boosted the input signal. And so you'll notice that to get the effect the first time I was kind of barking up the wrong tree because I would have had to boost the signal too much in order to get my effect. So remember, like what I said is that the human ear starts to really hear these effects and often the detrimental part of these effects when we boost too much. So it's one of those things where it's like you want to boost as little as possible and get your result. So the last step was to raise the threshold because the threshold, which is this little slider right here, is going to determine when the compression starts. So I had it way down here, and what that did is it basically made it so that it started compressing the signal before it was anywhere near its peak. So I was actually kind of robbing it of some of its juice. So you want to give it some room to breathe. So there we go. Let's listen to that again. So you can hear when I turn it off, it loses a little bit of life. So the apparent volume of the kick and the drum have gone up quite a bit, but there hasn't been this master fader is still not going into the red. So we're really having our cake and eating it.